Good morning. Welcome to Westbridge Church. My name's Jeremiah. I'm one of the pastors here. It's so awesome to have you with us. I want to say hello to everybody joining us online. Thanks for joining us there. And if you're in a parent viewing room, that's a great option if you have small children you prefer to keep with you during the service. And hello to everybody joining us in our cafe. Minnesota, you tricked us. You did it. We thought spring was here, but nope. What an interesting morning. Thanks for being here. I know it's windy and crazy and it feels more like winter than we've had at all this year, but you're here. It's awesome to have you here. I want to just jump onto and sort of just refocus and kind of echo what Chandler was saying in the video there. Because Easter's only 2 weeks away, and we've never done this before at Easter where we've said, hey, pre-register for a seat. Every year for 17 Easters in a row, we've just said, show up and we'll do services. But because of just the growth we've seen, we just want to make sure that everybody has a seat. We want to make sure that we can serve all the kids, all the students, that we have coffee, that we've all the things that go into making a service happen. And so, we're 2 weeks away. If you would go into the app, if you'd go onto the website and register for that, that just lets us know who's coming when so that we can make sure that we're serving everybody. And we only do that now, like we do that at Christmas Eve and Easter, and that's pretty much it, but just because of how many people walk through our doors during those seasons. But that's an exciting opportunity because it is a specific season where your friends might say yes to an invitation when they might not otherwise. And so I want to encourage you to not only register, but invite somebody to join you and to come and sit with you. And if Westbridge is your church home, would you consider serving at a service that you're not attending? Because even if you're not on a regular serving team, just going, hey, I'll jump into one service because I want to make sure that when other people invite their friends and neighbors and coworkers and loved ones that they're being served really well. And you can do all of that all in that one same spot. The other thing, I just want to mention this real quick before we jump in. 2 weeks from tomorrow, so the Monday right after Easter, we're going to be doing a small group. We're starting a brand new small group here at church called Starting Point. And Starting Point is this. Hey, one, I'm new to faith, and I just need a starting point. You should sign up for this group. It's going to be for 8 weeks. Two, I've got a lot of questions. Like I'm in my faith journey, but I've got some questions and some doubts and some struggles and some things that is there a safe place for me to ask my questions? And the answer to that is yes, Westbridge is always a safe place for you to ask your questions. We encourage you to ask your questions. But secondly, this is a specific environment that's set up for you to bring some of those questions and we can discuss them and talk through that. So I want to encourage you to do that. If you've been following Jesus for a long time and you're like, but I still got some doubts and some struggles and some questions that I just want to have answered, this is the place to do it. And we want to specifically create that environment. I'm personally going to be leading that small group. It's going to be every Monday night right here at the church from 6:30 to 8 over the next 8 weeks, starting right after Easter and ending right before Memorial Day. So it's the perfect 8-week window. And if that fits you, sign up for that. You can do that right in the Church Center app or on our website. All right. We have been walking through this story together through the lens of the Apostle Peter for the last several weeks, and we're getting close to the conclusion of this story on Easter. And you know what I've noticed in my own life, and maybe this is a part of your story as well, but I know it's a part of my story, is this. Faith often deteriorates as circumstances deteriorate. In other words, when faith goes, when circumstances kind of go sideways and when circumstances don't go the way that I expected them to go, my faith often goes sideways as well. And this seems to happen to all of us on some level, doesn't it? Our confidence in God rises and falls, oftentimes based on the random circumstances of life. And in those moments, it's very easy, and I don't know about you, but I know it's easy for me, for my faith to quickly get replaced by fear. And fear does something strange in all of us. It turns us into fortune tellers. Fear makes us fortune tellers because when we have fear, we suddenly become sure of what the future holds, and we become sure of what, that nobody holds our future, basically. I know exactly what the future holds, and I'm pretty confident that nobody holds my future. That's what fear does to us. It turns us into fortune tellers. And some of you might even feel that way right now. Maybe you're in a season where you feel that way, and maybe through a set of circumstances outside of your control, something has shifted, and your future has changed. The future of your family has shifted and changed, or the future of your career has shifted and changed. The future of your finances has shifted and changed. And you're in a season where you're kind of, it feels like circumstances have gone sideways and I'm trying to figure that out. And it would be easy for me to stand up here and say, just believe. Just have faith, right? Like click your heels together 3 times and look in the mirror and say, buck up, buckaroo. But I can tell you, I really don't have the moral authority to say that or to do that because I oftentimes have the exact same emotions. But I do think there is someone who does. I think that if the Apostle Peter was standing here today on this stage, I think he would tell us something along those lines. I think he would tell us something along the lines of don't give up, don't lose hope. And he's got a little bit of moral authority. He's got a little bit of something to back it up. We're in the 6th week of this series called The Rest of the Story. And if you're jumping into the middle of the movie and maybe you haven't been here all the weeks, you can go check them out online anytime. I'd encourage you to do that. But really, this is the story of Jesus of Nazareth. It's the story of Jesus. And it's the story of Jesus of Nazareth, and it's told to us narrated by Simon Peter, one of Jesus' closest friends and followers. He followed Jesus for 3 years. And then for the next 30 plus years, Peter would travel around the Roman Empire and he would tell the stories of what he saw and what he experienced and what Jesus did and what he taught. And Peter, some 30 years later, is absolutely 100% convinced that his rabbi, Jesus, is actually the Son of God, that he's actually the Messiah, the God in the flesh come into the world. And so he would tell the stories. Imagine meeting Peter, and Peter, tell me what it was like. Tell me what Jesus said. Tell me about the time that Jesus did this. Tell me about the time that Jesus did that. And Peter would repeat these stories again and again. And now here he is. He's in his 50s. He is in a Roman prison. We don't know if he's under house arrest or a prison cell, but he's been arrested by the Emperor Nero. And history would tell us that eventually he would not make it out of this imprisonment. He would be executed by the Emperor Nero. And so he's here and he's telling his story one last time to a guy named John Mark. And John Mark is a traveling companion of Peter. And now he's sort of giving him the story. And there was, history tells us that eventually Peter would be executed. John Mark would make his way to Alexandria, Egypt. Copies would be made and then eventually spread around the Roman Empire, collected with other writings, and eventually become a part of what we call the Bible. But if you're reading it, the way it comes to us is the book of Mark or the Gospel of Mark in what we call the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And so really it's Peter's story, narrated to John Mark. And the thing that Peter says over and over again, there was this one central theme that shows up throughout the stories. And it's this thing that Jesus taught. Everywhere he went, Peter would say, he traveled all over the place. His fame spread like crazy because he taught this one thing. It was this: the time promised by God has come at last. That all of human history had been hinging on this one moment. All of human history had been waiting on something to happen. There was a promise that they were waiting for fulfillment on. And Jesus came in, and the thing that he proclaimed everywhere he went was, the time has now come. The time that you've been waiting for. It's here at last. And he would say this: the kingdom of God is near. Repent of your sins and believe the good news. The kingdom of God is near, and you can know that the kingdom of God is near because the king has stepped foot onto this planet. The king has come to town. And so you can know that the kingdom of God is near, and our response is to face it and embrace it, to repent of our sins and put our trust in what God has done. And so if you've been tracking with this series so far, last week we left off with Jesus and his disciples have left the area of Capernaum, have left the area of Galilee. All of the book of Mark has been taking place with Peter telling us, man, this is where I grew up, and these are the stories, and Jesus' fame is spreading all around the Sea of Galilee. And now they're making their way to Jerusalem, which is south, but they're making their way up because Jerusalem is set up on a hill. And they're going to Jerusalem specifically to celebrate the Passover together, and they're making their way down through Samaria. And as they're traveling, Jesus flips the authority paradigm upside down. He says, guys, you know how people with authority and people with power and people who have wealth and they leverage all of their power and their authority for their own benefit? And they go, yeah, of course we know that. That's how the world works. That's how the system works. Those who have power and authority leverage their power and authority to get their own benefit. And then Jesus says something to his disciples. He says, among you, it'll be different. I came to establish a different kind of kingdom, and I'm a different kind of king. And I'm not the kind of king that came to leverage my power and my authority and lord it over people. I came to come under people and serve people and help people. And before anyone could object, he leaves them with this thought. He says this: for even the Son of Man, which is a reference Jesus makes about himself, even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. He would say, look, I'm not the kind of king, like most kings have a bunch of servants that are all gathered around them for their comfort and to serve them. And he's telling them, guys, I'm not that kind of a king. I came to reverse the order of things. And I'm telling you, I'm the kind of king that came into this world to serve others and to give my life as a ransom. And that phrase in particular was a phrase that bothered Jesus' disciples, because as they traveled, the crowds were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And Peter would tell us all over the area, Jesus' fame was spreading so quickly. And as they neared Jerusalem, they were swarmed with Judean pilgrims who were traveling from all over the Roman Empire, coming into Jerusalem to celebrate the festival of Passover. And Peter would tell us, like, man, the crowds that were there. And as Jesus is coming into the city, Peter would continue his story and say this: many in the crowd spread their garments on the road ahead of him. Jesus is walking into the city and people are taking their garments and spreading them down. And others spread leafy branches they had cut in the fields. And Jesus was in the center of the procession. And the people all around him were shouting, "Praise God! Blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord." They're going, this is it. I mean, he said that the time has come, and so, man, this must be it. And then it gets political. They say, blessings on the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Praise God in the highest heaven. Blessings in the one who comes. And the idea was there's this prophecy that he's going to sit on the ancient throne of David, and whoever does that is going to restore the nation of Israel. And they're gonna overthrow the Roman Empire, and they're expecting that from Jesus. It's gone political. They believe Jesus is marching to take over the ancestral throne of King David, and he's gonna set up the new kingdom of Israel, and he's gonna declare freedom from the Roman Empire. And the disciples are thrilled, because Jesus had been saying, when we go to Jerusalem, I'm gonna suffer at the hands of the religious leaders. I'm gonna be turned over and I'm gonna suffer. And now they're marching into Jerusalem, and I mean, imagine just the hype that's going on, and people are throwing their garments on the road and taking branches and putting them on the road and declaring Jesus king. And they're going, man, maybe all this gloom and doom stuff Jesus has been talking about is behind us. Maybe that was a mistake. And Jesus arrives in Jerusalem and he heads straight for the temple. And I think if you're one of Jesus' disciples, you gotta be thinking, this is it. Here he goes. And here's what Peter tells us. So Jesus came to Jerusalem and he went into the temple. After looking carefully at everything, he left because it was late in the afternoon, and he returned to Bethany with the 12 disciples. That was it. He's like, he comes into the temple, he kind of looks around, they're like, he's like, all right guys, let's go. And they walk back to Bethany, which is about a 2-mile walk from Jerusalem, and they spend the night in Bethany. And then they get up the next morning and they head back into Jerusalem. And again, the disciples got to be thinking, okay, today's the day. And instead of making himself Messiah, Jesus just makes a big mess. He goes into the temple. And all year, Jewish people make sacrifices in the temple. This is in almost every religion in the first century, there was some kind of sacrifice that you'd make at some sort of temple. And the Jewish people had taken that model and then said, no, this is what it looks like to make sacrifices to God. God says, I'm going to give you a standard by which to do that. And so they would make sacrifices, and specifically, not only did that take place all year round, but specifically during the week of Passover, people would travel from all over the Roman Empire. The Jewish people would return to Jerusalem, wherever they were living, and they would make sacrifices that week. And rather than travel, long distances with a goat or a lamb or a dove that you're going to make a sacrifice of, it was much easier to travel to the temple and then purchase an animal in the temple courts. And so you had people there who would sell a goat or a lamb or a dove or whatever animal you were supposed to sacrifice for your specific sacrifice and your specific offering. The problem was they had set up in what was called the court of the Gentiles. And so Jewish people were allowed to go into a specific part, but if you were non-Jewish or if you were Gentile, you were required to stay in this outer court. And they had set up this market all in the outer court. So now Gentiles who had come to worship God really had no place to worship. And on top of that, if you were gonna buy an animal to sacrifice, you had to specifically use the temple currency. And to use the temple currency, that meant whatever currency you were bringing with you, you'd have to exchange it. So you'd go to the money changers where you could exchange the currency. And then those who were the money changers, they would actually have a tax. It's kind of a processing fee, if you will. Anybody familiar with those? And so it was like, oh yeah, I can exchange your currency for temple currency. There is a fee for that. And so people are coming in all over the place, and these guys are really getting wealthy off of people who have come to worship. And they would charge a temple tax for the privilege of using this service. And so Jesus comes into the temple and he sees this and he starts flipping over the tables. And there, you can imagine there's currency flying everywhere and he's flipping over the tables and he makes a huge mess of the temple court and he accuses them of turning the Lord's temple into a self-serving enterprise. And the disciples got to be thinking, Jesus, what are you doing? We need these people. If we're going to set you up as king, like you can't be making these enemies. And then when the leading priests and teachers hear this, man, when the leading priests and teachers of religious law heard what Jesus had done, they began planning how to kill him. But they were afraid of him because the people were so amazed at his teaching. So his fame had spread so much and everybody loved this guy. I mean, he's this rabbi who teaches things they've never heard before in a way that has never been taught. And everybody loves him. He's so popular. And they're like, man, we've got to get rid of this guy. And once again, Jesus leaves the city. And then he comes back again to the temple the next morning. And this time they're ready for him. They're like, okay, we've sat up all night. We've got these questions. We're going to trap Jesus in his own words. And if we can trap him saying something against the temple or against the Roman Empire, something that we can arrest him on, and then we can have him executed. And so this is their plan. And they start asking him these really tricky questions. And he responds to their questions with a parable. And in the parable, it's very, very clear to them that Jesus has made the leaders the villains of the story. And this just makes them even more angry. And so you arrive at Mark 12, verse 12, and it says, the religious leaders wanted to arrest Jesus because they realized he was telling the story against them. But they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away. And once again, Jesus is there and he's teaching and they're trying to trap him, but they're so afraid of the crowds because the crowds love him, that they just love Jesus. And so he continues to teach on the Temple Mount, and you have two groups that make up the religious and political leaders of first century Judaism. And together they're this council, but it's two separate groups called the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And so both groups decide, okay, we've got some questions that we're going to try to trap Jesus with. So they arrive at the Temple Mount and Jesus is teaching and they try to trap Jesus and the Pharisees go first. And when you hear this, you're just like, man, Jesus is so brilliant. He's so brilliant. The Pharisees approach Jesus in the Temple Mount where sacrifices are made every single day. And they come to Jesus and they try to kind of butter him up a little bit. So it starts like this. They go, teacher, we know how honest you are. You are impartial and you don't play favorites. You teach the way of God truthfully. Like, you're the best. You're so cool. You're so good. Now, they're just trying to set him up. They're trying to trap him. Now tell us, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or shouldn't we? Now, the tax they're talking about is a specific tax that every Jewish person pays. Regardless of age, every Jewish person, man, woman, and child, has to pay this specific tax. It was a tax that was imposed when the Roman Empire began to occupy Jerusalem and the area of Judea and the nation of Israel. And the older patriarchs, the older sort of patriots of Judaism, and man, they hate this tax. Because this tax was imposed when they were taken over by the Roman Empire, and it's this reminder to them. Every time you have to pay this tax, it's this reminder. We are not a sovereign state. We are not a sovereign nation. We are occupied by the Roman Empire. And so, this is a clever question. If Jesus says, yes, pay the tax to Caesar, he loses popularity with a lot of the patriotic Jews. So it kind of puts a chink in his popularity. But if he says, no, don't pay the taxes to Caesar, then he gets in trouble with the Roman government. And so this is kind of a conundrum. And it's Passover week, so the anti-Roman sort of feelings and sentiments are running high. And the disciples are thinking, oh man, they've come up with a real doozy this time. How does Jesus keep getting himself in these situations? They've really got him backed into a corner on this one. And Jesus doesn't have a Roman coin on him. And so here's what Jesus' response to them is. He says this, Jesus saw through their hypocrisy and said, why are you trying to trap me? Show me a Roman coin and I'll tell you. Like, show me a coin. And so Judean citizens were required to pay this tax with a Roman coin. And on the front of the coin was an image of Tiberius Caesar. And the inscription around the coin would say this: son of the divine Augustus, which is interpreted a son of God. The phrase son of God was a common phrase because it was known throughout the Roman Empire. And on the back, it proclaimed Tiberius to be the high priest of the Roman religion. And so everything about this coin was offensive to Jewish people and their worship of God. And so they brought the coin. And he asked them, whose image is this? And whose inscription? This coin that you're carrying around, whose image is on it and whose inscription? And this is what is so unbelievable about their own hypocrisy. When Jesus asked them for a coin, they had one on them. They were carrying it. And the Pharisees and religious leaders are walking around the temple courts carrying images in their pockets. Now, here's what you have to understand. This is one of the top 10 commandments, the law of Moses. The 10 commandments says, don't make any images. Don't worship any images. Don't prioritize any images. Like images, I'm your God. I'm going to dwell in the center of you. I'm going to be with you. I'm your God. You're my people. No other images. And so they didn't have any images in their home. There were no images in the temple. And these religious leaders were in no position to criticize Jesus because they're carrying around on the Temple Mount the image of this idolatrous imperial money. So Jesus says, well, whose image are you carrying around? Well, Caesar's, they replied. It's like, well, if you're carrying around Caesar's image, I suggest you give it back to him. He says this, well then, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. And his reply completely amazed them. And so the Pharisees scamper off to lick their wounds and come up with another question. Now it's the Sadducees' turn. So the Sadducees get up there and now they're going to present something to Jesus. And the Sadducees are a group of people that don't believe in the afterlife. They don't believe in life after death. They're like, nope, you serve God while you're here on earth and our lives are for God. And then after that, you return to dust. And so they present this hypothetical situation to Jesus to show how absurd is his belief in the afterlife. And they say, okay, here's the situation. There's a man and a woman, they're married, and before they have kids, the man dies. And Jewish culture would say the brother then has to marry her and carry on the family line. So the next brother marries her, but then before they can have kids, he dies. And so the third brother marries her. And before they can have kids, wouldn't you know it, he dies. And then the fourth brother and the fifth brother and the sixth brother, the seventh brother marries her and then dies, and they don't have kids, and then finally she dies. Probably from exhaustion of marriage, you know? And they go, Jesus, in the afterlife, which they don't even believe in, this is just a hypothetical, they're trying to trap Jesus. In the afterlife, who is she married to? Great question, right? Jesus' response to them is just brilliant. Haven't you read about this in the writings of Moses? By the way, Moses is their guy. Everything is about the law of Moses. They might have different interpretations, but they all agree Moses is who we follow. The law of Moses is why we do what we do. It's everything hinges on the law of Moses for them. He goes, this is your guy. This is what Moses said. This is what Moses wrote. This is Moses' experience. In the story of the burning bush, haven't you read about this? Long after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had died, God said to Moses, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. I am, like present tense, I am the God. In other words, he's the God of the living, not the dead. You have made a serious error. He says, this is your own guy who says this, and in the present tense, talking about people who have long since died, God says to Moses, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You've made a serious error. And then Peter would tell us this, and it's kind of funny. After that, no one dared ask him any more questions. I don't really want to get publicly humiliated. And so no one asked him any more questions. And so Jesus and his disciples, again, leave the city. And each night they're going back to Bethany and spending the night there. And as they're leaving the city, something extraordinary happens. As Jesus was leaving the temple that day, one of his disciples said, Teacher, look at these magnificent buildings. Look at the impressive stones in the walls. And in fact, when you're looking at the temple, it is absolutely impressive. The architecture is impressive. In fact, Herod had spent many years and lots of money building the temple for the Jews. He had made it earthquake-proof. And in fact, one of the stones that was used to build the temple, the heaviest stone that was used, and it's a marvel that they were able to do this without modern machinery and technology. But the heaviest stone that's recorded at the temple weighed in at over 500 tons. Not 500 pounds, not 5,000 pounds, 500 tons. How they even set that thing in place is unbelievable. And so just massive amounts of manpower, massive amounts of money spent, just massive amounts to build this incredible structure, the temple. And the disciples are standing there with Jesus and they're looking at this magnificent building. And they go, man, Jesus, this is just, it's amazing. And Jesus says something pretty remarkable. He says this, yes, look at these great buildings, but they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another. And then they just walk off. It's like, what a weird thing to say. Like, okay. And they walk to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus is there with his disciples. And at the Mount of Olives, which is not that far from the Temple Mount, you can see the Temple Mount. And it's almost like they're sitting there pondering what Jesus said before they left the city, and they're looking at the Temple Mount, and they're going, that's pretty remarkable. And for that to be torn down is just unimaginable. And so they go to Jesus, and they go, what did you mean by that? I mean, we were leaving the city, and we were like all in awe of this building, and you're like, yeah, it's all going to come down. Like, you want to clarify that a little bit? You want to expound on that a little bit? And then Jesus responds with the most amazing, remarkable, and probably the most verifiable prophecy that anyone had given. In this moment, Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. He explains it in incredible detail throughout this chapter, and the disciples can't even imagine such a thing happening. Like, this took years and years and years to build. It is incredible, it's magnificent, it's earthquake-proof. And then, 40 years later, on August 6th, AD 70, the Roman legions broke through the walls of Jerusalem after a 4-month siege. And when they got to the temple, they lit everything on fire that would burn. And everything that was stone, Titus, who was in charge and overseeing the Roman army that laid siege to Jerusalem, he used Jewish slave labor, and they took the stones of the temple and they pulled them down one by one by one. And eventually they would take all of the stones of the temple, because the temple's on this mount, the Temple Mount. And they took all of the stones and they took them to the edge and they pushed them over into the valley below. Now, if you were to go to Jerusalem today and go to the Temple Mount, you can still see those stones that are sitting there. It looks like this. They're still there. This is modern day Jerusalem. Everything that Jesus predicted came to pass. It's as unrealistic, as unimaginable as it felt at that time. It all came to pass. And why is that important? Because here's what Jesus had said earlier. Something greater than the temple has arrived. Something greater than the temple has arrived. They're looking at this temple in all of its greatness, and Jesus comes along and says, no, something greater than the temple has arrived. There's going to come a time, Jesus would say, when the temple is no longer necessary, where it's going to be obsolete. Something greater than the temple, in fact, is coming and has already arrived. The old is passing away, the new has come, the kingdom of God has come near, because the King has come. And something new had come, and the new was better. And the new was portable. The new wasn't like, brick and mortar and timber that was in one specific city and everybody had to come to it. The new was brand new, and it was portable, and it wasn't about a building and a sacred space and a sacred rituals. It was about individuals. It was about people. The new was something that would make the you beside you every bit as sacred as the temple in Jerusalem. And that's so important for you and I, because if you were ever handed a religion, if you were handed a belief system that was all about keeping sacred things sacred, but you don't treat people created in God's image as sacred, Jesus would say you were handed an old temple model that is 100% obsolete. It doesn't apply, because the Spirit of God was about to dwell in followers of Jesus. And later on, the Apostle Paul would write these words. He'd say, it's like We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Everybody knew temples. Everybody was familiar with temples. They're these big, ornate structures, and whatever gods you claim to believe in dwelt in those temples. So Paul comes along and he uses that same language that they're familiar with, and he says, no. Because of Jesus, everything's brand new. One greater than the temple has come, and now you're a temple. You're a temple. You're a temple. Your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and God's Spirit lives in you, and that makes the you next to you sacred. It's not about buildings and brick and mortar and timber. It's about the you beside you. The Spirit of God would come in, so the time had come. The kingdom of God had come. And all that was left was for the king to ratify this new arrangement between himself and all of mankind. And so here's what happens next. The Passover, which is why they'd come to Jerusalem to begin with. It was only a couple of days away. And so Jesus' disciples, they come to Jesus and they ask him, where do you want us to go to prepare the Passover meal for you? And unbeknownst to them, Jesus had already made arrangements. And so they followed his instructions and they got everything ready for the Passover meal. And the Passover meal is a celebration. Approximately 1,500 years earlier, the nation of Israel was in slavery. They had been in slavery in the nation of Egypt for about 400 years. And now God miraculously is delivering them from slavery in Egypt. But they had to travel light. They're traveling to get out of Egypt as fast as they can. And so the instructions from God are, you're gonna travel with bread without yeast, or an unleavened bread. It's a light, crispy, it travels, it keeps, you can just take it with you. And then you're gonna sprinkle blood over the doorposts of your doors. And every year, this is what the Passover is, every year they celebrate this specific time where God delivered them from slavery in Egypt. They call it Passover, and what they do is eat the same bread around candlelight, and they drink wine to commemorate the blood that was sprinkled over their doorposts. And this is how they celebrate this. And so Peter tells us, we're at this Passover celebration. And as they were eating, Jesus took some bread and he blessed it. This is the bread that they used to celebrate what God had done in the past. And then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, take it, for this is my body. And they're going, that's a little weird. Jesus, you want us to eat your body? But it was symbolic. Jesus was establishing something new. And he took a cup of wine and he gave thanks to God for it. And he gave it to them and they all drank from it. And he said to them, this is my blood. He said it after they drank. He's like, that's my blood. And they're like, oh. He says, this confirms the new covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice for many. Jesus took something they were already familiar with, the bread and the wine that they used to remember their past. And Jesus took the same symbols and said, now it's going to point to something else. It's going to point to something new. It's going to point to the sacrifice that I'm going to make for you. And it's going to point to a brand new covenant between God and all of humanity. And they're going, hold on. Everything about the bread and the cup is used to remind us of Passover. And the old covenant that God had established, this is an agreement that God had established with our forefathers, with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jesus, you're saying you're establishing a new covenant, but only God can establish covenants. And Jesus, besides, we don't need a covenant, we need a kingdom. Like, we need you to get on the throne and overthrow the Roman Empire. That's what we're looking for. But Jesus was the king who had come to reverse the order of everything, and his kingdom didn't look like the kingdoms of this world because his kingdom was not of this world. And while they were delighted to be in the presence of Jesus, and they were thrilled to be in Jerusalem during Passover, Jesus looked a little disturbed. And after their meal, they make their way to the Garden of Gethsemane. And while they're there, Jesus is praying, and the disciples are praying, and there's a disturbance. And they see torches, and then they see Judas leading the temple guard through the garden to arrest Jesus. And Peter isn't having it. And Peter responds violently, and he grabs a sword, and maybe he was actually, going for Judas. We don't know. But somehow he chops off the ear of the servant of the high priest. Just a sniper shot. And in the midst of this, I mean, can you imagine the chaos? One of Jesus' own disciples is leading the temple guard and leading soldiers to come and arrest Jesus. And then Jesus' other followers, like Peter and Judas, were eating dinner just before this, an hour earlier, together. And now Peter grabs a sword and he's trying to defend Jesus with violence. And in the midst of all this, Jesus, just like, all right, guys, break it up. He gets everyone's attention. Jesus says this, "Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there among you teaching every day." And so Jesus calms them and he goes with them. And Peter makes a decision that he will regret for the rest of his life. Because his expectation of Jesus and his experience of Jesus did not line up. There was a gap, and suddenly there's a gap between everything he expected Jesus to do and everything he expected Jesus to be, and now what he was experiencing. And there was a gap. And in that moment, Peter lost hope. And doesn't that happen to us as well? It happens to me. Isn't it true? My faith deteriorates when circumstances deteriorate. And this is exactly what happened for Peter. And I think it's possible that when Peter makes this next statement to Mark, I think it's possible that Mark goes, "Peter, are you sure you want to include that? Are you sure you want that to make it into the story? Are you sure you want this documented for future generations? I don't know if this inspires a lot of hope." And Peter goes, "This is what happened. You got to write it down." Then all his disciples deserted him and ran away. All of Jesus' disciples scattered. They ran away, and no wonder, right? Jesus wasn't the Messiah after all. Turns out there would be no kingdom, and after all, isn't it human nature to assume the worst about God when my circumstances are at their worst? Isn't that just, we all just have this propensity to do that. And again, my faith deteriorates when circumstances deteriorate. And in those moments, when circumstances have gone sideways and things feel like they're deteriorating, faith is quickly replaced with fear. And we become fortune tellers. And we are all sure that we know what the future holds, and we become certain that nobody is holding our future. And so, what are you going through right now? Maybe you're in a season where this describes your season. Are you going through something right now where you're wondering where God is at, where you're wondering, "God, what are you doing? Like, this is what I expected, and this is what I was hoping, this is who I expected you to be, this is what I expected you to do, and everything in my life is this. I'm experiencing something different, and there is a gap between who I thought you were, who I thought you would be, and what I thought you would do, and what I'm experiencing." And it's so easy for us in that gap to lose hope. And I think I know what Peter would say. I think if Peter was here, and if he would hear your story and you'd tell him, "Here's where the gap is," I think Peter would lean in, and I think he would look at you, and I think he would look at me, and I think he'd say, "Hey, I get it. I understand, because I did the same thing." I think Peter would say, "I've been there. In those moments when things went dark, in the moment when suddenly everything went dark, in the moment when everything I thought was going to happen went the exact opposite direction, the moment where I thought that I was a disciple and a follower of a very popular rabbi, and 1 moment later I was an outlaw." And I remember that moment, and I believed the lie, and I lost hope, and I deserted him along with everybody else. And Peter would say that was the second biggest mistake of my life, and it led me down the road to the biggest regret of my life. And everything I saw and everything I felt in that moment led me to the conclusion, God is not near. And Peter would say, but I was wrong. In fact, he was very near. In fact, in those dark moments when God seemed distant and God seemed still, looking back, I realized he was so close, and he was more active than he had been in centuries. And I think Peter would say to you, and he would say to me, don't do what I did. Don't cut and run. Don't abandon your faith. Don't give up. Don't lose hope. Don't walk away from your Heavenly Father. I think Peter would say, I would give anything to go back to that moment and relive that night. Now, here's what's fascinating. Think about this. The very men who abandoned Jesus, every one of these guys who abandoned Jesus, when suddenly their future went dark, suddenly there's this gap between what they were expecting and what they were experiencing, when they abandoned Jesus when he needed them the most. Every single one of these men are the same men who would spend the rest of their lives and risk the rest of their lives to ensure that you and I could know that God is near. It's amazing. And I think Peter would say this: God is active even when we don't feel it. And God is active even when we don't see it. And God is active even when our experiences tell us something to the contrary. So what do you do when things don't go as planned? What do I do when there's a gap between what I've expected and what I'm experiencing? What do we do when everything goes dark? Peter would say this: just don't give up. Don't hear me saying this. Listen to the words of Peter. He'd say, don't give up. Don't cut and run. Don't abandon your faith. God is active and God is working even when you don't see it and even when you don't feel it. And then the next day, after Jesus was arrested, he was put to death. And Peter would then say this: a couple of days later, I saw him again. I looked in the tomb. He wasn't there. I saw where he was buried, and I looked in that tomb, and he wasn't there. And then I saw him walking and talking, and I saw the scars in his hands. I saw the scars in his feet and in his side, and I walked with him, and I talked with him, and so did so many of his other followers. In fact, about 500 people saw Jesus alive again. And so Peter said, so I'm convinced. God is active even when we don't see it and even when we don't feel it. And I think if Peter knew your circumstances, he would say, don't give up, don't cut and run, don't abandon faith, don't allow fear to replace your faith. Because God is moving and God is active and God is working, even when you don't see it and even when you don't feel it. And that means death is not the end. And you and I have been invited to be a part of God's family. And you don't behave your way in or earn your way in, you're just invited because God created you and God loves you. So I think there's a couple of groups of us. I think there's a group of us that would say this: man, there's a gap between what I expected and what I'm experiencing, and sometimes things have gone dark and I'm tempted to throw in the towel. I'm tempted to give up. I'm tempted to lose hope. My prayer is that today you'd be encouraged to not throw in the towel, to not give up, to remember that God is active even when you don't see it and even when you don't feel it. And maybe there's a group of you that would say this: I've never said yes to the invitation to be a part of God's family. I want to say yes to that. I want to say yes to this brand new kingdom where God lives in me and I follow him and I put my trust in him. And if you've never said yes to that, I want to invite you to do that by just agreeing with this prayer as we close. God, please forgive my sins. Forgive me for the times that I've walked away from you. And I'm so grateful that you never walk away from me. And I pray, make me your son, make me your daughter. Help me to follow you and put my trust in you as best as I know how from this moment on. And God, I pray for every one of us who want to follow you day in and day out, but sometimes the experiences of life cause us to have fear of the future. And we wonder, are you there? Are you active? Are you present? And I pray that we'd be reminded by the life of Peter that you are active and you are present and you are working even when we don't see it and even when we don't feel it. And may we never lose hope. May we gain an eternal perspective because there's more to this life than this life. And God, may it lead us to live lives of love that point others to you. And we thank you. We pray this in your name. Amen.